should there be places where guns are prohibited? I mean, more recently there has been lifting of bans of firearms in parks, universities, in the state of Colorado.
Yeah,
Said that should there be places which are sort of gun-free zones?
I definitely think so. It's I think we have too many guns in too many places. Basically, the argument that the other side makes to me is we need more people carrying more guns in more places and we'll all be safer. My response is if that was the truth, this would be the safest country in the world, and we're not. And the studies show, and academics can argue, this my study shows this, your study shows that, but generally studies show that if you've got a gun in your home, it's 21, 22 times more likely to be used against you than against a bad guy. You or a family member than against a bad guy. Cities with more guns have more gun violence. States with more guns have more gun violence. Countries with more guns have more gun violence. Arizona ranks 6th in the country in terms of gun deaths per capita. You know, New Mexico is 7th. Wyoming is 9th. You know, all these states that you think the people like, you know, states like Massachusetts, New York, they're down in the 40s. They're not in the top 10. And part of it is because when you have a gun, and again, I'm not anti-gun. I got my NRA marksmanship badges growing up here at Camp Potawatomi in South Milford, Indiana. I saved them all these years. I could still show it to you tonight if you want to see it. I was proud of it. I kept it. And it's, but it was something that you learned when I learned it. I learned that there are risks that goes with guns. There are responsibilities that go with guns. You treat a gun seriously. And I talk to a lot of gun owners that's their attitude. And that's, you know, I have no problem with that. But our regulations are so weak that we don't ask if you know how to shoot a gun. We don't ask if you know what the gun laws are. We don't ask anything more than, have you been convicted of a felony? And even there, if the states don't send in the information, they're going to, you know, or they go to a gun show and from the so-called private seller, the background check doesn't stop them. We don't ask any of these things. We basically say more guns, the better. If we treated cars that way, we'd be having a lot more wrecks. So it's the refusal of our elected officials to treat gun violence seriously has led to more violence in this country, and that's something that's got to stop. More guns is not the answer.
Okay, I'm depressed. Do you have any hope that things will change in terms of fewer guns or more restrictions?
I think Congress is waking up for the first time in a long time on this issue. You know, the president said he's going to talk about it. We haven't had a president talk about gun violence since Clinton in the 90s with the Brady bill, the assault weapon ban, and then after Columbine. You know, basically every time we've had the shootings since then, you know, Virginia Tech or whatever, it's our and sympathies go out, and we don't want to talk about policy because policy is politics and politics is dirty, and therefore, you know, we shy away from it. But this time, you know, I think it's different. This time it was a congresswoman. This time it was. You know, if that group of victims doesn't grab the heartstrings of the American public, I don't know what is going to. I mean, this could have been anybody's Safeway, anybody's 9-year-old, anybody's, you know, a neighbor or father or grandfather, the federal judge, the congresswoman. And the fact that no laws were broken, I think, you know, again, takes away that old argument. And the fact that there is one law specifically, this ban on high-capacity clips that was in effect for 10 years, that actually worked, that Congress allowed to expire, that could have made a difference here. I think all of that is going to generate discussion finally. That and the police officers that are getting killed, that and the violence we're continuing to see. And part of my hopefulness is we're hearing from non-traditional supporters on this issue. We're hearing from non-traditional sources saying supportive things on this issue. Dick Cheney said that maybe it's time to look at these high-capacity magazines. You know, that's a positive step. Peggy Noonan, who was Reagan's speechwriter and a columnist for the Wall Street Journal, said that this is something that Obama should have talked about in the State of the Union, and it's something that Republicans will not go to the mat to fight for high-capacity ammunition magazines. The guy that brought the lawsuit that the Supreme Court took, the Heller versus DC case that established for the first time that there's an individual right, he says that such a ban would be constitutional. You know, so these people are saying these sorts of things. And there have been times occasionally when Congress realizes that these aren't always Second Amendment issues or wedge issues or political issues. In the late 80s, Congress banned cop killer bullets. Only a handful of people voted against that. In the late 80s, they banned plastic guns that don't show up easily in metal detectors. Only a handful of people voted against it. Interesting enough, Dick Cheney was one of the people that voted against both those, so he's even come around further. But if we think of this issue in that way, then something can be done. I'm giving more and more of my ideas already. It's it's one thing that I point out. I say that there are two myths that the NRA bosses have propagated that have really made it hard to make progress on this issue. The one myth that they propagate to Republicans is that the Second Amendment doesn't allow us to do anything about guns, that it's absolute. And if you read Justice Scalia in the Heller decision or Justice Alito in the McDonald decision, they both make it clear that while near total gun bans like DC had or Chicago had are unconstitutional, they also said this idea that anybody can have any gun and take it anywhere, anytime is also wrong. And Justice Scalia even said this right, the Second Amendment right, like other rights, is, quote, not unlimited. You can restrict who gets guns, where they take guns, how they're stored, how they're sold, how they're carried, even what kind of guns they are. That's Scalia talking. The NRA never talks about that part of the decision, and I think most of our Republican officials have never read that, because every time I read about some state legislator saying, we can't do background checks, the Second Amendment. No, read that decision. So that's the myth the Republicans have bought into. The myth the Democrats have bought into is that this is the politically radioactive, and that you will lose your election if you say the word gun. And that goes back to their version of what happened in 1994. And they ignore the fact that in '94 people were voting about Hillary health care and the post office scandal and Jim Wright's book deal and 40 years of Democrats being in control. And my recollection of, I was mayor back then, my recollection of the three races that flipped in Indiana that year from D to R was that gun control was not an issue in any of the three, or at least not a deciding issue in any of those three. But that's the myth they've gotten across. And somehow the myth is also that that's how the guy who ran for president in 2000 on the Democratic ticket lost, even though he won by 5 million votes, but lost because of guns. Here's 5 million votes ahead, but that doesn't count. And the 300 votes or whatever it is in Florida, they ignore that part. Al Gore lost because of guns, even though George W. Bush actually came out supporting the assault weapon ban, supporting child safety locks, and talked more about gun control in the campaign than Gore did. Gore was told run away from it. So Democrats have bought into this. They ignore the fact Bill Clinton got reelected in '96. I think maybe they're finally realizing that that's an old story. I mean, the Democrats that supported the bill to close the gun show loophole, 98% of them won just a couple months ago. Of the Democrats that got NRA money, 65 to 70% of them lost. So it's not saving them. It's basically people are looking at common sense issues in the middle, and NRA's not going to be the magic savior for them. It's not going to be a drag on them either. If they talk about it in terms of how do we keep our police officers safe, how do we make our public venues safer, how do we deal with the public, I think then we're going to see some progress.
Thanks, Paul.
Yep. And come tonight, we'll talk some more. Thank you.
So reminder, the event tonight is 7 o'clock in Neff Hall 101, and we invite you to follow us digitally through our website, Twitter, Facebook, and Tumblr. So thank you for attending.